show up on the channel too.
D minor.
So it's that. And I just
D major. And F major. D minor. Just
Question mark. Question mark.
yeah. Transit?
One.
Okay, everybody. We'll try to get a little more church. Is it good to schedule on a game day? Maybe not. What's that?
I brought it up a few times and people said, no, people don't vote for me.
Well, this will be a good test of that theory.
I said it wasn't good.
Plus money from the parking. Because a lot of alumni, people that graduate, they're successful professionals. They come back to their school for the game. Students won't pay a lot, but
they should have some
oh yeah, cricket in Australia. Oh, did Jagannath print that paper for me?
Yeah, the songs?
No, I sent him notes for my talk. Did you print those notes I sent you? That's what they play on the Beatles album. That George Harrison made that. Here we this needs to be a little closer. Okay, that's the melody they use for Prabhupada's pranam mantra. Nama Vishnu Krishna Vishnaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami. Well, the theory that it's okay on a football game day.
We need to change the dates now.
Yeah. Doesn't seem to work on the day of a football game.
What happened is 50,000 people going to the game. And also, even if they don't go to the game, they have all kinds of party going on everywhere.
So,
Remember when Ramana said Saturday was not a good day? And then we started doing programs on Saturdays and Saturday game days. Some people say, oh, it's not everybody goes to the game. And I was like, when there's a program, everyone goes to the game. It should be like more traffic.
it's a carol, isn't it? It's a Christmas carol. I forget which one it is, though. So we'll start a kirtan? Well, could have been worse. I mean, none of us have had a heart attack or anything. Okay, let's pray. We'll just chant for Krishna, for empowerment. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Yavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Namaste Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasadi Gaura Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sivasadi Gaura Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama See, Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare. Now the other song, the Singative. Nam is on the card. The Singative. Nam. Oh, sorry. Namaste Narasingaya. Namaste Narasingaya. Prahlada Sadayine. Prahlada Sadayine. Hiranyakasiporvacha, Hiranyakasiporvacha, Silatanga Nakalaye, Silatanga Nakalaye. Ito Nrisinga Parato Nrisinga, Ito Singa Parato Nrisinga, Yato Yato Yamita To Nrisinga, Yato Yato Yamita To Nrisinga. Nrisinga, Hrdayananda, Nrisinga, Hridaye Nrisingo Nrisingamadi Sharanam Prapadye Nrisingamadi Sharanam Prapadye. Just fooling around. Tavakara Kamalavare Nakam Adhuta Singa Dalita Hiranya Kashipu Tanubringa Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Tavakara Kamal Hare Nakam Adhuta Singa Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanubringa Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare. Hare Krishna. So, welcome everybody. Looking for, oh, there it is. Thank you for coming. Did Jagannath bring the sheet with my notes? Did he? Oh, it's right here. Hey, look at my voice going. So, Nanda, hey, come on in. Oh, Mashlomech.
Thank you.
So, Nanda, topic tonight. Spiritual basis of equality. So I'll begin by saying that historically, if we look at the intellectual history or the history of thought, East or West, really anywhere that people systematically thought about these things, what we call in Western philosophy metaphysics, or ontology, the nature of existence, two fundamental realities present themselves to us. One is that we're all different. We're all different. Not only are we literally different people, we have different abilities. Like people in this room, we obviously have different athletic abilities, different, say, artistic and language is a growing thing. So different artistic and musical abilities. You could say intellectual, emotional IQ, mathematical intelligence. There's many different kinds of ability or different kinds of intelligence, leadership skills, and so on. And we're not equal. All of us has a gift, you could say. In the New Testament, I believe that the word that Paul used was our charisma. It's a Greek word meaning, well, back then, everyone has their special gift. So, and yet we have different abilities. As I've said many times, University of North Carolina, Apple Hill, is the flagship university, public university for the state. It's very competitive, hard to get in. And so if everyone in the state was equal, they'd have open admissions, but they don't. So we have different abilities. We're all different. There are different races, different ethnicities, religions, different places in the world. People are different ages, different genders, and so on and so forth. So we're all different in so many ways. And yet, it has occurred to thinkers, to philosophers, from the beginning, that there's some way in which, despite all of this, you could say, extravagant variety that we find here in the world, despite all this, there's some way in which we're one. There is some kind of oneness. For one thing, we all exist. And so in that sense, we all share existence. And to exist is to exist. It's the same action. So anyone that exists in one sense in the same way that anyone else exists. I mean, obviously, to exist as a boy may not be exactly the same as to exist as a girl, to exist as a porcupine, or as a church steeple, or as a loquat. But so there are many different things in the world, but still, there's a sense in which the act itself of existing is something shared by everyone. In the 20th century, philosopher Heidegger talked about this, the nature of existence. German philosopher Heidegger. He got off to a bad start. He was in the Hitler Youth, but kind of improved and became a famous philosopher. But anyway, so that's what Heidegger focused on, the nature of existence itself. And also, something else occurred to people, thinkers, East and West. I mean, in the West, the earliest great philosophers, systematic philosophers, people like Socrates or Plato, to some extent Aristotle, but in the East, so many different thinkers, Bhagavad Gita. The idea that our bodies may be different, and they are, but somehow inside all of these bodies is some type of conscious spiritual being. And there is a oneness at that level, at the metaphysical level. I talked about this before. Sort of important point that physically we're all different. There's absolutely no empiric evidence that we're equal. It's very interesting that we have a political and social system, a justice system in this country, which we have peacefully and sometimes violently exported to other countries, secular democracy. The democracy obviously is based on the assumption that we're all equal. Now, it's interesting to make this assumption that we're equal because this assumption flies in the face of all empirical evidence. I mean, think of any conceivable test we could give the people in this room, and we'd get different scores. So empirically, we're different, and yet we've based our entire political, social, and justice systems on an empirically unprovable assumption that we're equal. Because we're not equal, obviously, we wouldn't be pushing democracy. So, in fact, if someone nowadays doesn't accept, of course, it's humanism now. We've overcome certain, how should I put it, obstacles to rational life or ethical life, obstacles like racism or feminism, sorry about that, sexism. That was not a Freudian slip. So things like racism and sexism. There's another one. There's another curve, a huge obstacle to rational ethical life that people nowadays haven't quite reached a consensus on, and that is speciesism. The idea that, because I mean, take sexism and racism. What's wrong with them? I mean, essentially, if you get down to what's their common evil denominator? Common denominator is the idea that if someone's body, physical body, is different from my body in some way that I consider to be important, if someone's body is different from my body, they have no value, they have no rights. Because only people whose bodies are, in the relevant sense, like my body, they have rights, but not others. Now, obviously, this sounds pretty wacky, and it is pretty wacky. But so if you ask yourself the simple question, like, oops, another guest here. So if you ask yourself the question, let's say come on in. Well, you already are in technically, but stay in. Thank you for coming. So we're talking about sexism and racism and other great cultural achievements. So if you think of America before the civil rights movement, if you think of America before the gender equality movement, you say, what were they thinking? Like why didn't they get it? What were they thinking? I was just talking to I lived down in Davidson. I was talking to a girl, a student at Davidson. We were talking about a famous theologian who lived in the I think 1500s. Give you a hint. He made his headquarters in Geneva, and he killed some of his theological opponents. And I said, well, that's not very nice. I mean, how could you belong to a church named after someone that murdered his theological opponents? And so she responded, well, he was a medieval man. What do you expect? So if we ask questions like that, like what were they thinking or why didn't they get it? Aren't people going to say that about us in the future? Like, how could they think that they could brutalize, murder, and eat sentient, that means conscious, feeling creatures just because they belong to other species? Now, if we say, because we have to be consistent here, I mean, it's a question of, are we seriously concerned about having a rational life, or are we totally comfortable with irrationality? I hope you're not comfortable with getting things wrong. I mean, in the sense of just things which are obviously hypocritical or contradictory or couldn't possibly be true. For example, if we say that human beings have all kinds of rights and animals don't because they don't have human intelligence, although, I mean, everyone knows that some animals are smarter than... You see these bumper stickers, like my, dog. What's that intelligent species of dog? Yeah, is smarter than your honor student or something. But somehow we have... I mean, if you look at animals, they all defend their own. I mean, look at, go to YouTube, see all these nature films. Like if all the, let's say in Africa, a herd of some type of antelope or a deer or something's being attacked by lions, they hang together because they're the same species. So when we say that we are concerned with human beings and far less concerned with animals, or not concerned with animals, or only concerned with animals to the extent that they make cute urban pets. Right? I mean, what's the worst kind of government? If you know Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, that great novel, 1840s English novel, Jane Eyre, where in the very beginning she's sort of trapped in this house with a sort of an evil, but just really sort of a cruel stepmother who abuses her, and the stepmother's son abuses her, and so she says to this boy, she finally confronts him and says, "You're like the Roman emperors." And so Roman emperor is kind of like the symbol of just evil governance. And so if you think of the typical thing, and if you read the histories, contemporary histories, they were pretty evil sometimes, but at the Colosseum, right? And if the emperor puts his thumb up, the person lives. And he puts his thumb down, the person's just brutally killed. So, in other words, the worst kind of governments where people themselves have no rights. People themselves have no rights. All you live or die at the whim of a tyrant. So in America, if you look at our legal system as it impacts non-human people, if we think that an animal makes a cute pet, like a dog or something, dogs have incredible rights in this country, but another creature has the same intelligence, same, cognitive development has zero rights to be brutalized, murdered, eaten simply because it doesn't please us. It doesn't appeal to our whims. So now, if we say that because when we say human beings are special, if we take up humanism as opposed to honoring life itself, but if we take to humanism, are we simply being bestial? Because all species, I mean, let's be honest here, a male lion sometimes eat lion cubs or kill them, not nice, but in general, there are terrible exceptions. We have people like that in our human society, but in general, animals take care of their own. So if we are humanists, is that an enlightened position, humanism, or is it just bestiality? And if we say that human beings have more ethical value because they're more intelligent, how can you avoid applying this among human beings? In other words, if it's interspecies, why isn't it intraspecies? If it holds true as a valid ethical principle between species, why wouldn't it hold true as a valid ethical principle within a species, inter and intra? Showing off my knowledge of prepositions there. But anyway, so people could look back at us and say, what were they thinking? How could they think that just because, and go back to racism and sexism, what's the fatal flaw? Stripping people of their rights simply because their bodies are different than your body. Let's look at speciesism. Bingo. It's a match. So what people will say, what were we thinking? So when we talk about equality, there is actually a Western philosophical term called biocentrism. It's the idea that value emanates from life itself. For example, if we say, let's say you say to a man, you're just using that woman, or you say to a woman, you're using that man, or you're just using your children, and so on. It's a serious accusation. But if I say to you, hey man, you're just using that chair. Yeah, I mean, what else do you do with chairs? So, because obviously we live in a bi-dimensional universe in which there are living conscious things and there are dead unconscious things. And there's a significant difference. So, okay, so I made that point. So I just wanted to say that equality, it has occurred to many thinkers, actually, throughout history, Western intellectual history, Eastern intellectual history, that somehow we are one because we all exist. And we not only exist, but we exist in a very special way called life. We not only exist, but we exist in the sense that we're alive, and to be alive in a meaningful sense usually includes consciousness. So to exist, to be living, and to be conscious is a very special status in the universe. And so, but if we say we're equal, go back to the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson claims we hold these truths to be self-evident. We're created equal. For Jefferson, it's actually a metaphysical truth. It's not empirical. You can't empirically show that we're equal. It's ludicrous because we're not equal. But it's a metaphysical claim that somehow spiritually or metaphysically or by the will of a creator, just like there's an analogy. Just as in the eyes of the parents, all the children are equal. I suppose there are families where if one kid gets straight A's and the other kid gets B's, one kid gets money and the other kid gets beat up, and teeth knocked out or something. But there are horrible, abusive scenarios like that. But among civilized people, I was lucky. I had very good, loving parents. I was very fortunate in the parents I had in this life. And, among myself, my siblings, we didn't all achieve equally in everything. Some, are better at sports. Some are better at music. Some are better in school. Some of them made a lot more money. And yet in the eyes of the parents, we're all equal. Obviously, in the eyes of good parents, all the children are equal. And the children learn to see each other as equal by seeing each other through the eyes of their parents. This is practical psychology. This is practical, real-world psychology. Why is it that when you go home for a family dinner or something at some holiday, even if someone, one of your siblings made tens of millions of dollars, and other ones, homeless shelter. But God help the rich one if he tries to give any financial advice to the poor one at the dinner table, right? The family dinner table. So I don't know about your family. My family's, it was just all alpha males. Anyway, but the idea is that that's what families are like. Someone may have a PhD, someone dropped out of high school, someone's rich, someone is just kind of still living off the parents. But the point is, when the family sits down at a holiday dinner table, everybody's equal. It's just all the siblings are equal. So there's something which overrides material accomplishments or failures. A sense in that we're one, because even grammatically, you talk about a family. A family. The family may have, extended family may have hundreds or thousands of members, but it is still one object. It is a family. And within that family, there is a sense of equality, that everyone is special and everyone is equally part of the family. And like I said, psychologically, you learn to see everyone in your family equally by looking through the eyes of your parents, because your parents hammered that point home. We love all our children equally, and hopefully they act that way. You learn to also see everyone in your family equally, despite material circumstances. So you could say that this reality of human life just kind of bubbled up from the primordial goo of the universe, or there's another way to look at it. For example, Plato looks at it this way, and many other philosophers have looked at it that way, which is that this world is a reflection of a higher world. You see, I'm not, and by the way, this is not a debate about evolution theory, because for the point of view of what I'm saying, it doesn't matter. It's not really relevant. How human beings came to be in their modern form, this way or that way, it's not really relevant to the point I'm making. Because if there's a God or if there's not a God, you still have the same fossil record. And you could say that things happened a certain way. So, did God make it happen that way? Did it happen without any God? That's not something science can answer, because science is a physical discipline, not a metaphysical discipline, and that is totally outside their area of expertise. And if you get into sort of like the little nooks and crannies of advanced physics, what you find is that even in so-called deterministic equations, there is actually still room for free will and random events, even within deterministic mathematical equations. So the upshot being that I want to focus on the metaphysical thing, because that's where the equality is. Physically, you ain't got equality. You can try all day and all night. You're not going to come up with equality at the end of it if you just stick to the physical realm. Not only are you not going to come up with equality, you're not going to come up with justice. You're not going to come up with anything like that, because those are all metaphysical things. They're not physical. Justice is not a physical object. It's not like a hydrogen atom. Justice is a metaphysical item, not a physical one. So if your ability to analyze the world is restricted to physical things, you have to give up everything which, frankly, we would call civilization. Like equality, justice, all that goes out the window because it's all metaphysical. But from the metaphysical point of view, the ultimate truth is above us. Something's very nice about materialism. If you're a materialistic philosopher, you end up with a worldview in which you are the greatest thing that ever happened to the universe until we discover more advanced life on some other planet. But as far as what we know now, we're the greatest thing that ever happened to the universe. Whereas if you buy into a metaphysical view, it's very humbling, because actually we're kind of this problem here on this planet, and we're trashing the planet, and we're kind of ignorant, and hopefully higher beings who know a lot more than we do can help us before we destroy ourselves. So the idea being that if you look at analogies like parents seeing children equally, and children learning to see each other through the parents' eyes, and therefore assimilating this equality. Or, for example, in a democratic state, if you look at children, you look at little children playing. Any child psychology study ever done will show you this, and they can be brutal. Children can be all over each other. They hit each other. Over over with the toys. They steal, one steals from the other. There's a process of civilizing children. And if you look at animals, I mean, animals are incredibly brutal. What they do to each other, just sometimes to, I don't know, amuse myself, I look at these nature films, and it's just unbelievable what they do to each other. What animals do to each other, it's really, really heavy what they do to each other. I mean, the violence, the cruelty. I mean, it's not cruelty in the sense they don't know what they're doing, but and for example, the most common thing in mammal kingdoms and even other forms of life is that typically males will kill each other over the female. Crimes of passion. So this takes place among dolphins, even such charismatic creatures as dolphins. The males are just always having these shootouts or butt outs or whatever they do, over a girl. They both want the same girl. And then this happens practically in every species. And so if you just want to be natural, you're going to end up in an extremely brutal, horrible situation. You're not going to have equality. I mean, show me the animal, show me the species of life where they sit down, they enter into rational social contracts and everyone's equal. I want to hear everyone's roar, or I want to hear everyone's bark. I mean, it doesn't happen. It's not like that. It's extremely hierarchical, extremely violent, and so on. So it's the metaphysics that civilizes us. And the idea here is that we learn that everyone's equal. Children don't think that. You have to, you really have to teach them that and somehow get them to see it. This is a higher consciousness. Now, are we just indoctrinating them with some mythology? Is it just that we're telling them a fairy tale? That the empirical truth is really the truth, that we're not equal, but we somehow or other, because we become attached to certain worldviews, and then we indoctrinate our children with non-empirical fantasies? Or is there some sense in which we're actually equal? So this gets into theism. The idea that this world is a reflection of a higher reality, and that there is a what you could call a God or an absolute truth or a source of everything, which is actually personal. You have to understand what's at stake here. Again, if you just don't care about being rational, if you don't care about, let me put it this way. Philosophies are like psychologies. Even if you don't study it, you've got one. You may not study psychology, but you have one. And if you don't study psychology and you don't know what yours is, it's probably better you do know, because you may engage in some unfortunate behavior. So even if you don't study psychology, you have one. And even if you don't study philosophy, you have one. Because at every moment we are making free choices. Every free choice is an expression of a system of values. When you get out of bed in the morning, that is a value assumption. You are making a metaphysical assumption, namely that it's better for you to get out of bed than to stay in bed, or better to stay in bed, or you should go to class or not go to class, or you should feed yourself or not feed yourself. These are all metaphysical acts because they're based on free will. So therefore, if we look at someone's behavior, it's very easy to figure out what their philosophy is. Even if they don't care about philosophy, they've got one. And for example, we can take a particular community of people. Let's say a community of people who abuse each other in various ways, really serious abuse. It could be between men and women. It could be between parents and children, between peers. But a community where all kinds of abuse goes on. And there is a very pathological psychology which is dominating there. Now, perhaps in that community, no one really cares about psychology. No one reads psychology books. But we can still figure out, here's the problem. Here's the psychopathology here that's leading these people to abuse each other. So in the same way, we can look at what's going on this planet today, whether it's the, how should I put it, the perverse monopolizing of wealth by an increasingly small number of people, which is frankly destabilizing society, the polarization of wealth distribution, whether it's, I mean, there's all kinds of problems in the world, all kinds of abuse going on at various levels. And so this is actually based on a philosophy. It's not only a psychology, there's a philosophy here. Because again, consider this. Our bodies are different spiritually. Let's say, I mean, just take it for granted for the purpose of our discussion that spiritually we're equal. Souls are equal. That is spiritual beings, we are all equal, even if our bodies are different. So a society which is narcissistically obsessed with the body. If you want to sell toothpaste or wing nuts or donuts or, I don't know, airplane hangers, you have to use sex to sell it. For someone, I mean, my age, I still am astonished at the level of vulgarity in this country. I mean, even my own people in my family, like we didn't grow up that way. You talk to them now, it's like F this and F that and S this and S that and F, and then you wonder, like, there are other words, in the English language. If you look at movies, just the incredible vulgarity, the incredible materialism, the sort of like shamelessness is in. If you can strip human life of all dignity, of all modesty, and of all shame, then, well, basically you have a highly reviewed movie. So, but the point is, the more we're into our body, the more we promote this body consciousness, the more we promote inequality. Because our bodies are different. Someone's got the hot, sexy body, another great term, hot, like he's hot, she's hot. This is like a really dignified way to talk about rational creatures. So not everyone has the super, like say women, not everyone has the super sexy hourglass figured body, which they actually calculated the Barbie doll. If a woman was actually shaped like that, she would probably like literally break in half or something because she couldn't support her own weight. But, or guys, and so it's like this obsession, this narcissism means that most people have to be losers. And we are literally degrading each other in our own minds. Because instead of seeing ourselves spiritually, which is the real basis of our equality, we're seeing ourselves as objects of vulgar gratification, and that's where all the inequality is. So we can talk about democracy all day and night, but there's incredible number of workarounds. I mean, the fact that we officially have democracy has really not at all been an obstacle, either financially, socially, in terms of power, in terms of anything. It's there's a million workarounds for that. So what we're trying to do in Krishna West is encourage people to avail themselves of this great spiritual science. It comes from a part of the world I wasn't born in. I'm not just rooting for the home team. I'm California. This is not a California body of wisdom. So it's just like science. If someone somewhere in the world finds a cure for cancer or AIDS or this or that, who cares where the person came from? It's like, I'm not going to take that pill because the person who invented that came from Japan, and I'm just not really comfortable with their political policies. No one cares. It's like, I think they really did steal that island from China. I don't think that, but I'm just giving an example. So, in other words, science is science. Science, it's like geometry. Let's say in Western civilization, maybe Euclid was kind of like the father of geometry. Yeah, measuring the earth, geometric. So, but it's just if it's science, it's science. We don't filter. If you're studying science, you don't filter out all the theories that came from countries that you're not really attracted to. And so spiritual wisdom needs to be scientific. We've got to get past the level of dogma, of, how should I put it? Like there's this cliche in our culture that religions cause most of the wars. Anyone ever heard that? But what I ask people is, if you came from another planet and all you knew about religion on Earth was a religion, say, of Asia, would you still believe that religions cause most of the wars? It would be Or if you talked about pagan civilization, look at the Romans or the Greeks. They never fought religious wars. I mean, they fought wars. The Romans never met a war they didn't love. But, I mean, and they were very violent. I mean, the Romans, there's a word about the Romans. Their self-understanding was that they were begotten, the Roman race was begotten in a she-wolf by the god of war. So, anyway, that kind of tells you a lot about their self-understanding. So the Romans, they were battling here and battling there. The Romans weren't fighting to bring Jupiter to the world. They weren't fighting to save souls by bringing the world Jupiter or Minerva. I mean, they were. So this idea of religious war, this idea that if you don't belong to my religion, your religion is bad, it's evil, it's wrong, is it's not only a wrong idea, it's actually kind of psychotic. Because if this were true, that God literally tortures people forever, imagine torturing someone forever. I mean, if you think about it, if this were actually true, God would be the most evil creature ever conceived by a human mind. So it's unfortunately most people don't believe it, and most Christians don't believe it nowadays. But so what we have to do is just very briefly, and then I don't want to go on, and then maybe we'll take questions. Is the reason the world has so many problems right now is because the world has become so materialistic. The reason the world has become so materialistic is because, having encountered so much bad religion, people have decided they're not really into it so much anymore, and they want to move on to other things that don't cause so much human suffering. So spirituality, or you could even say religion, and I don't mean by religion sectarian religion like I'm right and you're wrong, but just the idea of having some kind of piety, some kind of devotion, some kind of serious interest in what is ultimately real. That's what I'm talking about. So it's like food. If you don't, you see, I can't eat this bad food, like whether it's this is genetically engineered, or this food is going to cause diseases. The solution is not starving. If you're against bad food, unhealthy food, the solution is not starvation. We have to somehow or other get real food into the marketplace. And so in the same way, any fool knows that the religious history of the Western world, and for that matter, the Middle East, at least for the last 1,000 years, has been pretty god-awful, to use that term. I mean, if you look at as bad as you think it was, I mean, inquisitions and witch burnings and crusades, as bad as you think it was, if you read the real history, it's actually much worse. So, I mean, think of post-traumatic stress disorder. You all know about that, PTSD. Now, post-traumatic stress, just what it says, post-traumatic, after the trauma, the stress still remains. It's like, let's say you were a combat soldier, and which, it's obviously can be very traumatic. And then the war is over, at least your duty is over, and you're not in battle anymore, but the stress is still there. And the stress is so severe it causes disorders. That's post-traumatic stress disorder. And some of the main symptoms of PTSD, as it's called, are hypervigilance, which means that, let's say, for example, someone, a guy or a girl was in combat and saw all kinds of terrible things, even did terrible things, and then they come back home, and let's say a car backfires, and they just they dive for cover. Or someone's walking toward them, and they think, they become paranoid because they had to walk through situations where anyone could pull out a gun or a knife and kill you. And so the result of, or a primary symptom of post-traumatic stress disorder is hypervigilance. You're like over-vigilant because your nervous system can't go through that again, so you're hypervigilant. And because of this hypervigilance, there's a strong propensity to withdraw. Like, let's say relationship. Let's say you were in a relationship and you got really hurt very badly. So then it's like, you have trouble committing because I like you, but if I commit, I may get, massacred again. And I can't go through that again. So when there's trauma, there's hypervigilance, and then you withdraw. You pull away from things. More than, let's say, someone who wasn't traumatized would. So this post-traumatic stress disorder can occur not only among individuals, it can occur within a society. For example, take birds. I mean, there's a reason why birds in certain places are afraid of humans and other places are not afraid of humans, because in a place where the humans, kill the birds or torture the birds are afraid of the humans, and they actually pass that on to the next generation. Because when the little baby birds are just learning, going through their drills and everything, and learning how to do everything, this trauma, this mortal fear gets passed on. And so what you have is, you can have a post-traumatic stress disorder which actually spreads society-wide and is passed down through generations. So, and it's exactly what's happened in the Western world. And this is the main problem. I mean, I hate to sound like I know the main problem, but I think I do. Anyway, that when you talk about the fact that people cheat each other, people abuse each other, racial discrimination, gender discrimination, discrimination against people for their economic status, or, I mean, look at the world. Look what's going on. It's not just about body type. For example, consider in England in the let's say late 18th century, in the 19th century, there was a position called governess. A governess basically was always a lady who became a tutor in the house of a wealthy family. In those days, they had big houses because, for everything that we plug in nowadays, they had a servant. They had like human appliances for washing and doing everything. So every appliance we had, they had a servant. That's why the houses were so big, because everybody lived together. But a governess is very interesting, because a governess was usually an educated woman. And there was a huge bifurcation, a huge divide between ladies and gentlemen, which was a minority of the population, and everybody else. They spoke differently, they dressed differently, they did everything differently. They were two worlds. And so a governess was an educated woman. Often she had what they called accomplishments. She could often play a musical instrument very nicely. She read. She was, and another thing is, she was always white. But what's interesting about this is, still, governesses were really looked down on. And for some reason, they were actually treated often abusively. This comes out constantly in, for example, the novels of Jane Austen. It comes out constantly, this problem of becoming a governess. So all this stuff you get about discrimination and abuse, anything will do as a marker. It can be race, it can be ethnicity, it can be religion, Sunni, Shia, Protestant, Catholic. It can be economic status. It can be linguistic. People speak differently. That was, My Fair Lady. If you know My Fair Lady, that know everything about linguistic status markers. So what I'm saying is, people can grab onto race, they can grab onto ethnicity, they can grab onto gender or economic status. They can grab onto anything. But there's a universal problem, which is that people envy each other. People put each other down. They embrace these zero-sum games where I rise by pushing you down. I rise by stepping on you. And the lower you go, the higher I go. And again, this is bigger than racism. It's bigger than sectarian religious violence, because it's just a universal that grabs onto any distinguishing marker that it can get its hands on. The solution is not murderous sectarian religion, obviously. And the solution is not murderous secular ideology, such as fascism or Marxism. Interestingly, in the 20th century, you had the great power struggles were ideological. They were secular. Fascism, communism, or democracy. It wasn't conflicts between religions. You had the same violence. And because of the Industrial Revolution, you had exponentially more brutality. So you take religion out of the equation, nothing changes. Therefore, the real issue is, You take race out of the equation, nothing changes. You take, sectarian religious strife out of the equation, nothing changes. Because you've got to get the root cause. What's the root cause of people trashing each other? And what I'm suggesting is the root cause is materialism. Becoming bestial, taking the body as a self, because it's the soul, it's the spiritual understanding. It doesn't matter what religion we're talking about here, but this basic spiritual understanding that no, our bodies are different, but we are equal, we are one. Even if you're in an animal body, or I'm in a human body, or I'm in an animal body, you're in a human body, or it doesn't matter our race, doesn't matter gender, nothing, that's all irrelevant, because we're all spiritual beings equally. No one is more of a spiritual being than anyone else, and no one is more dear in the eyes of a supreme personal source than anyone else. Interestingly, if you look at one of the great contributions of Jesus, is that even though, to be honest here, a lot of times you have to put political correctness aside to make any intellectual progress, but the point is, back then at the time of Jesus, first of all, Greek was English. And if you wanted to be, that was the language, that was the international language, Greek. Even in Rome, sophisticated people spoke Greek. Just like, Tolstoy, War and Peace, sophisticated Russian nobles spoke French in Moscow. So anyway, Greek was a prestige language. Greek was English. And you had this extremely sophisticated civilization, Greco-Roman civilization. The whole Renaissance was a rebirth of that civilization. Very sophisticated, very intellectual, and so on and so forth. But they thought slavery was okay. They were really good with slavery. Take the greatest historical example of pure democracy, not Republican democracy, where you elect officials, but real democracy where the people themselves talk to each other face to face and govern their community. And the quintessential example, of course, is Athens. Everyone walked up the hill to the Acropolis, literally the high city, the Acropolis. They went to the high city, the Acropolis, and the citizens governed their city. Now, how did they have so much time to attend all these endless political meetings? Simple. They had so many slaves at home. So, sure, I got time for another meeting. Sure, I can be on that committee. So it was interesting. Jesus, it was the idea that, and Jesus was not a religious fanatic. That's the good news. So it was this insistence of the Good Samaritan, for example. Why did Jesus talk about the Good Samaritan? Because Samaritans were looked down upon. They lived north of Judea. They were considered to be lower class people. In fact, when they rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem, the second temple was built, there's a story in the Old Testament where the Samaritans come and say, hey, we can help build the temple. And the Judeans say, I don't think so. We don't really need your help. No Samaritans. So Jesus, he makes his point. Look, it's a Samaritan, the person you call low class, who is actually dear to God, who is actually the virtuous person. So the idea that because there's a supreme parent, that rich or poor, politically powerful or weak, it doesn't matter. You're all equal. God doesn't care about how much money you have. God doesn't care about what race or gender you are. God doesn't care about your political status. Just like the parent, a mother doesn't love her child more because, the more you put in your bank account, the more kisses and hugs you get. And it's sincere. I'm not just trying to encourage you. I really do love you more the more money you make. My God, anyone here want a mother like that? Or I love you less because that deal went sour, yeah. So it was Jesus. It was actually based on the teachings of Jesus that people got the idea that maybe slavery is not a good idea. That's just an example. So if we can get past this post-traumatic stress disorder about religion, and last point I want to make here is that everyone know your Hegel philosophy of history? Anyway, after Newton revolutionized everything, and so everyone wanted to have a science. They wanted a science of politics. That's what they got to do. That was Newton's influence: political science, social science. We need a science for everything. And so then they thought the ultimate thing would be a science of history, a science of everything. Because history means everything that human beings have ever done. So anyway, Hegel came with this dialectic, which Marx kind of turned into this weapon of mass destruction. But the dialectic is very simple. There's a thesis. Thesis means status quo, just the way things are now. Then there's an antithesis. Something opposes it. They clash, and some new thing comes out. Like, say, two rivers meeting. You have, the status quo is there's two rivers. Each one has their own water. The water has its own unique chemical, mineral composition, and so on. They're just two rivers. Rivers are different, like people, because of, the land they flow through and all kinds of factors. So the two rivers come together. There's some turbulence, and then a new entity emerges, namely that new river. It's a synthesis. So Hegel said that's how history moves. There's like for example, there was a situation in Iraq, and then its antithesis arose. The new status quo after post W, after George Bush, the situation in Iraq was, okay, we're not going to be sectarian, we're not going to be all this clan tribal violence. We're just going to be Iraq. We're going to be nationalists. Of course, it didn't work because of the bad president they had. But so then something arose which contradicted that Iraqi nationalism, which was this evil Islamic state. So now they're trying to get to a synthesis where they. So anyway, it's thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So the thesis in this case, the status quo was bad religion. By bad religion, I don't mean Jesus is bad, Judaism is bad. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, as it was lived, as people actually lived it, all kinds of horrible things happened. I mean, there good things happen, but a lot of horrible things happen. People reacted against it. If you look at the last 500 years of Western history, it's a history of more and more people distancing themselves from this cruel, monstrous religion. I mean, whether it's the Age of Reason, the Renaissance, et cetera, et cetera. So now we live in an age when, God, religion, but we need to move forward to the synthesis. Okay, bad food, no good. Starvation, no good. Let's get good food. We need positive, good, intelligent spirituality so we can re-spiritualize the planet and save the planet, because this narcissistic, vulgar, self-gratifying materialism can only lead to all kinds of horrible things. There's really no other. I mean, look at history. It's just degradation leads to systemic collapse of society. It's a no-brainer. So the reason we're in Chapel Hill here is because we're inviting everyone to participate. I mean, learn more about it. This is not sectarian. It's just an attempt to re-spiritualize the planet in a reasonable, powerful spiritual way. And of course, we have to re-spiritualize ourselves first. Anyway, I will actually stop after so many false promises that I was stopping. I actually am going to stop. So, any questions on these points? Krishna? Yes. Oh, no. I meant the other. Bios. The Greek word bios means life. That's why, bios, logos, the logic of life, or the science of life. Oh, yeah, exactly, yeah. But biocentrism, as a Western philosophical term, means that, like, where is ultimate ethical worth located? And it's located in life. The fact that something lives makes it ethically significant. It deserves to be considered. Obviously, in terms of ecology, this would be a godsend. Yes.
How does that relate to spirituality? I mean, if we just all agree that, okay, life is the basis of ecology, we're a living community.
Right. Okay.
How does that go into
right.
Particularly into according to the body, the yoga is equality.
Right.
So, I was just, how does that relate to spirituality?
Okay. Because life itself is spiritual. There's no such thing, how should I put it? Interesting. Aristotle wrote a book on the soul called De Anima, about the soul, anima. That's the origin of the word to animate. So the body technically is not living. Technically, there's no such thing as a living body in this sense. The soul actually animates the body, brings it to life. So the body, the relationship of body to soul can be compared to the relationship between, let's say, an electrical apparatus or electrical wire and electricity. Right now, for example, electrical light is coming out through that light fixture up there. So we do not experience electric light without a fixture. Well, actually, we do. Lightning. But anyway, just go with this limited example here. And that is that it would be absurd to say that light bulbs create electric light. And someone can say, no, I can prove it because when I take out the light bulb, the light goes away. This is actually an argument given by modern materialistic philosophers. I mean, like university philosophers at great institutions. This is the logic they use. Because they give basically a neurological argument. That because everything we do to the nervous system, the brain, the nervous system, affects consciousness, this shows that the nervous system produces consciousness. This is frankly, it's a laughable argument because you could prove that light bulbs produce electric light. So this body conducts consciousness. This body conducts life. Your brain is conducting your consciousness. But your consciousness comes from you, and you are not the body. I was mentioning again, I mean, it's obvious that we're not the body. I'll give you a few examples. The fact that you can intelligibly say in English, I was 3 years old. Why does that prove you're not your body? Because if you divide your age by 7, that's how many reincarnations you've had in this life. In the literal sense of the word, carne in Latin means flesh. Unfortunately, chili con carne. So to reincarnate means to reinflesh. And so we've reinfleshed many times in this lifetime. Divide your age by 7, roughly. So, for example, Spieglein an der Wand. Anyone here know German? Yeah, that's German. Mirror, mirror on the wall. That was the Brothers Grimm. They wrote in German. Spieglein an der Wand. Anyway, so when you look in the mirror, that's good. I know you know German. Wir sprechen später. Oh, yeah. So when you look in the mirror, you're actually not looking at the same face that you looked at 2 weeks ago. Because it's new skin. Your skin replaces itself approximately every 2 weeks, approximately. So how could it be you? It's literally not the same. And where did the skin come from? Well, you're eating. Isst, was isst. Another German, he is what he eats. So we're eating. So that means you eat food. Food comes from nature. So what is now your skin used to be, fruit on trees or grains or whatever food you eat. It was actually outside your body. You ate it. Your body transformed at least part of the food into skin. So how could it be you? You don't become anyone want to come in? Just sit down. Oh, well, our mystery guest. There used to be a thing called What's My Line, that old panel show in the 50s. The mystery guest would come and sign in. Anyway, so you don't become a different person every 2 weeks. Let's say you have a girlfriend and she's gone for 2 weeks and she comes back and say, I'm sorry, the boy that you knew is no longer exists because the skin changes every 2 weeks and everything changes, the hair, the skin, everything. So we couldn't be the body because there is a continuous personal identity. We say it. Examine your own language. Where you say, I was a baby, I was a child, I was this, I was that. It really was you. I mean, how can you deny that it was you that was born on this day to these parents in that place? It was you. But the body's not the same body. Your little infant body didn't stretch into your present body. It's a different body. So the idea that I am the body is simply silliness. And yet our entire civilization is based on this obvious absurdity. Namely, that you are the body. So it's like, come on, guys, wake up. We have an entire culture. I mean, I come from what's called Tinseltown, Los Angeles. That's where I was born. So they call it. Anyway, I won't go into my thing about LA. So we're not the body. What was it? I mean, it's just obvious that we're not the body. We're something different than the body. So spiritual life means try to understand who you are. Who's that continuous person? So another simple example I already gave, that we're equal. Let's take it for granted we are really equal. But our bodies aren't. We're not athletically equal. We're not artistically equal. We're not mathematically equal. We're not social in terms of our social gifts equal. We're not equal. And yet we're equal. So equality is not the body. There's something more important. It's the real us, the real person. That's where the equality lies. Even Thomas Jefferson knew that, my God. So, any other question? So the biocentrism is, so the life, our body, including our neurology, it's conducting consciousness. It's conducting consciousness.
So our,
Yeah.
our association with the individual is basically a physical association with that person's body. But when they pass away, why does everybody stand in front of the cup and say it's gone? The body's right there. When they're physical association.
That's another good example. Yeah, we know that the person is, in fact, we use the expression passed away. Person passed away. So it's just a question of getting everything lined up. Like, let's have a life that makes sense based on what we know to be true. So there's no other questions? Anyway, thank you for your patience and allowing me to browbeat you with all these points. And a little practical bhakti yoga mantra. The word mantra, there is sort of like, how should I put it? In Sanskrit, they use all these didactic, if not historical, etymologies. In other words, you analyze the word. It's not necessarily historically that's how the word came to be, but it's just a way to think about the word that helps you to remember the wisdom. So man, in Sanskrit, man means to think. And you have the word manas, mind. Obviously cognate with English, mind, mental, and so on. English is intimately connected to Sanskrit. English is an Indo-European language. So man indicates the mind, and then tra in Sanskrit, to deliver, in the sense of save someone. Or literally like trana means to carry across difficulties. And so mantra, the idea is to carry the mind over all the difficulties of this world, to save the mind and purify the mind. So the power of sound, there's another term in Sanskrit, Shabda Brahma. Shabda means sound, word, and Brahma means the absolute or spirit. And the idea is that words can be spiritual. There's another important point, because there are some people that say the truth is ultimately impersonal, so words, are just mundane. But no, words can be spiritual too. So the idea is by chanting the mantra, ultimately, by chanting the names of God in any language, it's actually direct association with God. By the way, this understanding that somehow God or the absolute or the source is present in the name is found in every major world religion. You find it in Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism, which was the most popular Buddhism in Japan, like Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Nam means name, from Sanskrit, Nama. Judaism, if you study the Old Testament, you'll find that You'll find in the Old Testament that when David conceived of building a temple in Jerusalem, but because of that little bump in the road with Bathsheba, he couldn't do it. So that when Solomon actually built the temple, and then so the Bible's talking about that, how the temple was built and so on. It says over and over again that the first temple in Jerusalem was built as a temple to the name of God. That as God lives in heaven, the name, which is God, also lives in the temple. Baruch Shem Kavod. And so in Christianity, you have the idea of the holy names. There's a holy names college. So in Hinduism, of course, the idea of Heda Twa Namana, that there's no difference between God and the name of God. So this idea that somehow the name of God is an incarnation, avatar of God, is found in every major world religion. It's not a sectarian idea. And so when we chant Hare Krishna, Hare, an appeal to the feminine aspect of the Absolute, Krishna, the masculine aspect of the Absolute, it's God as the infinite, the source of infinite pleasure, infinite beauty. You can chant, I mean, if you say the name of God in any language, in any religion, it doesn't matter. It's a mantra. If you just say, hey, you, it's a mantra in the sense of you mean God. So we're going to chant. Again, it's not a sectarian process. It's a universal process found virtually in every major spiritual tradition. So, we have the sheets. We'll chant a little bit, and then we have some refreshment. Again, thank you very much for your patience. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama